Okay, so now that we have our image on our object, let's talk about how we can manipulate it. You'll notice that if I'm looking at this side, the image looks a little bit more realistic and proportions are accurate, where, especially compared to this one, if I go here, I know that this is actually more accurate towards the actual proportions of the object or the actual image. But you'll see that every face has the exact same image. It's orientated the same direction on each time, and it matches the scale of each face. If you think about it, it's similar to the idea of having a projector throwing an image on top of a screen. Now, this is actually having a projector on each screen, and each projector matches the actual aspect ratio of the image or the actual face of the geometry. And so if you take this concept into mind and we want to actually get into what's actually happening, what we're looking at is essentially the same idea as a paper model. If I go into my Google search, if you ever bought a paper model, basically what you get is a painted paper that you have to cut out and then crease to fold to make it represent an actual three-dimensional object. Well, with the UVs, we're going the exact opposite direction, and what we're going to do is build a model, flatten it out so that we can put paint on it and move forward from there. So one way we can do that, if we go into our UVW map modifier, we'll get access to a gizmo. Let's go ahead and orientate it to the Y direction so it matches our reference here. And so as if you can think about it, this camera is representing the projection that's being used, but we're actually using in 3D software the UVW map. So let's go ahead and get rid of the camera and go into here. Now I'm going to go into the sub object, go into gizmo, and I'm in the move tool. I'm just going to slide the gizmo out so that we can actually take a look at it. If you look, you'll see that the size of the gizmo is a little bit different than the actual face, and so what we have here is actually explicit control about how that image is actually being set onto the geometry and how the geometry will actually represent and render it. So if I go into the rotate tool, you'll see that I can slowly rotate it, and you can see that the stretching on this axis has started to go away. Now we're getting a mirror effect here, and that's just based on the orientation of the normals, which is the rendered side of the actual object. We'll get into normals here in a little bit. I'm going to rotate this back, and I can do the same thing with the banding up top if I rotate it in the x-axis, or if I can go into a more of a mix of the angles, you can see that I can get rid of all the banding but severely lack the accuracy of placing this object on the face itself. If I click fit, it's going to move the actual gizmo back into the actual center location of the object based on the actual pivot point of the object, and it's going to extend the borders to the actual extents of the actual face that is oriented towards. If I change this from planar to cylindrical, you can see that I get kind of the same result. What's happening here is I'm taking this image of the village and wrapping it around into a cylindrical format. Let's change this to the z-axis and orientate it up. You'll see that there's a green line here, and that's the actual seam of the actual image. If I slide this back into position, you'll see that it's now being oriented to this side of the photograph being on those faces, this side, which is where the seam is, of the photograph being placed there. I can move this in the z-axis as well, and I can play around with the rotation as well. This is just playing with the actual projection of the actual object. There are several other projection modifiers you can look at. There's a shrink wrap, a spherical, and box, face, and UV to XYZ to UVW. Just as a simple note, the reason why we call these UVWs is the next three letters in the alphabet away from XYZ. And that's all I've been told, and that's what I'm going to stick with. Now, let's go into what's really happening here. And I want to get into how we flatten this object and control where our vertices sit directly. We use the unwrap UVW modifier for that particular object, for that scenario or process. And what we're going to do here let's get into this modifier real quick. I open up the editor window. Now what this does is just basically give me a workspace to where I can actually look at how my geometry is being placed on this image, or how the image is being placed on my geometry. It's a really either or kind of scenario. So what I here is I've got vertex, edge, face, and element, and this whole thing is the element. If I go into face and just click on one face, let's go in here and click on it. Oopsie, gotta be in sub-object mode. Open UVs. So there's one face. I can slide this over and reposition it. Go in here and slide this over. So now I only got one triangle. Looks like I've got my object split up into editable mesh. The controls get a little finicky, so be very precise about everything you're grabbing. So now I've got kind of things splayed around, and the display is not showing all the actual quality of the actual objects. Let's go into mapping and just do a quick flatten mapping and just hit OK with defaults. What I've done now is actually take all these faces and flatten them out onto the actual grid inside the actual space. I go to this pull down menu here, go into this image, you'll see that all my faces are orientated to fit inside what is called the 1-1 space. And what this is just basically where the actual image resides in the actual memory. This is the actual true start of the actual image, the true edge, top and bottom edges. You can see that no matter what though, the image is tiled forever. So if I go into here and click on this button, wherever I have an image, geometry is going to render that image into that UV square. And so you can see that I can actually put my faces on the same pixels, but they'll have different UV coordinates. So this is what we want to get into when we're building our gladius, which will be in the next video, and I'll show you how we can unwrap that using some of the projection modifiers and some of the actual tools inside a fairly complex but yet simple tool.